I notice how you say that I'm very gracious. I think that I've been roped into this from the beginning. Gracious is such a nice term for slavery, don't you think? I like that. We have three actual speakers, and you're going to hear from me a little bit as well. But first on our speakers, we have Rick Watson. Some of you may have met him at some point or another. He served as an elementary school teacher and principal with the Clark County School District for 36 years. He was originally from Kansas City, Missouri. We're not going to hold that against him. But he migrated to Southern Nevada in 1946 and located in Carver Park. Went to school there in the Carver Park School and later in the Townsite School and St. Peter's School. So he has a good long-term tie to the area. We're going to give him that. Graduated from Bishop Gorman High School, received his BA and MA in education from Nevada Southern University. You know, we don't want to get into this modern stuff here. Since my wife is a professor there at that modern one, UNLV. Ed married his college sweetheart, Joanna Watson. And they have 4 children, 9 grandchildren. Very cool, nice. Yeah, 10 now. Update your listing here. There you go, yes. And he's been with the Historical Society from the beginning. So, and he will be speaking on the history of the Henderson School District here. Next we have Mary Beth Scow. I've known Mary Beth for quite a few years. Well, she was on the county commission. I ran the county museum. I had to be nice to her, of course. You know, I mean, she graduated from Brigham Young University, and she and her husband Stephen moved here to Southern Nevada, and they've been here for well over 4 decades. They have 9 children, and I like this. At last count, 38 grandchildren. 39, you see? You have to update your site as well. That's very good. And she was selected as Nevada Mother of the Year in 2009. That's very cool. She served 3 terms on the CCSD Board of Trustees and received the CCSD Excellence in Education Hall of Fame Award. She was later elected, as I noted, to 2 terms on the Clark County Commission. She has volunteered in many community organizations, and this is quite a list. Her home church, the Silver State Schools Credit Union Board of Directors, the Monter Academy Board of Directors, the Public Education Foundation Board of Directors, the Boy Scouts Board of Directors, the Las Vegas Philharmonic Advisory Board, and the UNLV Department of Education Advisory Board, and the Nevada Parent-Teacher Association. Obviously doesn't have enough to do. So, and last but certainly not least, we have Henderson Councilman Dan Stewart. I want you to note, I'm not going to read the whole thing, Dan, but well, he came here in 1979 to Green Valley, which is where I live in Henderson. And I always say in Henderson. Yeah, it's not Green Valley, it is Henderson, as we both know. Or, as I do like to say sometimes, West Pittman. But he worked for the family-owned company of Nevada Rock and Sand, ran a heavy construction company. He became president and CEO of Basic Management, parent company of Basic Water Company, Basic Power Company, Basic Remediation Company, Basic Environmental Company, and the Landwell Company. Got tired of Basic? Yeah. Oh, okay. But he is also Vice President of Development for the Gardner Company, Master Developer for UNLV Harry Reid Research and Technology Park, And as I say, he is on the city council, and he and Mary Beth will be talking about, I guess, some of the ideas for the future of the Henderson schools. I'll leave it at that. Now, my only part in this is sort of pre-Henderson schools. We tend to think of the Henderson School District and when it merged into the Clark County School District, which is now the 5th largest school district in the United States. But there was a school district before that, and that was the Railroad Pass School District. That was founded in 1932. There was actually a school at Railroad Pass before that. It went out of existence. It was restarted as the Railroad Pass School District in 1932 because that's when the railroad actually got to Railroad Pass. Railroad Pass got its name for a railroad that was going to be built from Salt Lake City to Pioche and then all the way down to Searchlight before there was a Las Vegas. And they had surveyed it, and it was going to go through a pass in the mountains down here, so they decided to call it Railroad Pass. That was the only place in the state of Nevada that was named for a railroad that was never built that finally got a railroad many, many years later, 30 years later. But when it got that railroad, the first load that was carried over that railroad was a load of lumber to build a casino in order to cover up a speakeasy. You know it as Railroad Pass Casino today. And we'll be talking about that at our next Henderson Speaks event. But because that one was there, yeah, you might as well just leave them on. Nothing else is going to come on. Can everybody see us down here? Okay, so don't worry about it. We're okay. What's that? Oh, well, we're going to be dark. That's all right. We'll handle it. Oh, no, we'll be fine. So anyways, we've got Railroad Pass. We now have a railroad going through there in 1932. But with Railroad Pass, there's workers there. With the workers come families. Also, 2 other casinos are built at Railroad Pass on the other side of the road from where Railroad Pass Casino is, and some other businesses were built there. So some families moved into that area, and there was a need for a school. So they created the Railroad Pass School District. You could do that. All you needed was 10 kids, and you could create your own school district. So they had the Railroad Pass School District. So you start fast forwarding. Now it's 1939. They're beginning to look towards the fact that the federal government is looking towards the fact that there's a little dust up going on overseas in Europe. And it looks to be a pretty bad dust up. There's going to be a war. And it's fairly clear that we're going to be part of this. So they have to start planning for that. And they're looking at the fact that there's a lot of magnesium available in the Gabbs area of Nevada. And they have a process that can process that magnesium ore. But that process requires a whole bunch of water and electricity. And so we have a U.S. Senator by the name of Patrick McCarran who is pushing to put a plant down here in southern Nevada so that that ore can be brought down here and processed. Well, they need to have some place to build that plant that's close to water and electricity. What do we have here? We've got a big chunk of concrete out there that's holding back a whole bunch of water and making a whole bunch of electricity. Aha! Let's put it down here. Well, if we're going to put a huge plant here, we're going to have housing. And if we're going to have housing, we're going to need schools and all that sort of thing. Well, if we're going to need schools, we're going to need a school district. Why bother to start a new school district? We've got one just up the road at Railroad Pass. So what did they do? They took the Railroad Pass School District and expanded it. They didn't create the Henderson School District. They took the Railroad Pass School District, expanded its borders, and encompassed what was going to be basic town site. The first school district here was the Railroad Pass School District. That's why the first high school here was the Railroad Pass High School. That was its original name, not Basic High School. It was originally Railroad Pass High School. And it then became Basic High School, but it was originally that. And the school district's name was originally Railroad Pass School District. And just because that was already in place, it was easier to expand those borders to start the school district here when there was no Henderson. Why would you name it after something that hadn't been named yet? Henderson itself wasn't named until '44. That's when Henderson got named for a Northern Nevada senator who never showed up here. Yeah, Clarence B. Henderson. He did send an autographed picture to the city, who still has it. I believe the city still has it. You know, so woohoo! Got an autographed picture of Clarence B. Henderson. Woo. But that's where the Henderson School District gets its origins. It was expanded out, covered this area, and expanded so it covered Pittman as well. It was the borders were really expanded out to cover all of this housing area. It covered Carver Park, covered Victory Village, and at that point, the school districts only covered grammar schools and junior highs. They did not cover high schools. The high schools were part of a different series of education districts. The Valley was the education district number 2, and that was all of the high schools in the Valley. Education district number 3 was Boulder City. So the high school wasn't part of the Henderson School District, it was part of the education district number 2. I don't know why, but that's the way it was organized at that point. But the Railroad Pass School District, which became the Henderson School District when Henderson became Henderson, was the original district here. So that's all I have for you tonight. I'm going to turn this over to Rick, who is the one who was there, who worked in it, and is going to tell us a lot more than I can. So thank you for listening to me. And by the way, at the end of this, hold all of your questions, because we'll have time for questions at the end. So please, if you have questions, you can note them down. We will have time for questions at the end. And we're going to have each of our speakers speak. And then we have a surprise speaker who's going to tell us about a new book that she has written. And then we're going to take questions from the audience. So let's go on to Rick. Thank you.
The first school in Henderson, the first official permanent school, was the Townsite School. It was a K-12 school, kindergarten through 12th grade, high school and elementary school kids all on the same campus. And some folks would just get hysterical about that, but I attended school there, and I know a bunch of this audience attended school there, and probably have fond memories of those days. I'd be particularly interested in it because it gave you a chance to have science teachers and math teachers who specialized at the upper level, who could serve as mentors and helpers for elementary school teachers who are always looking for a way to make math come to life or to make science come to life. Plus, the elementary school could benefit from the wonderful opportunity to have tons of science equipment that comes with a high school. One of the PE teachers at the Townside High School was later the principal in Park Village. And Robert Taylor was his name. He was a great golfer. People know Robert Taylor. He was the principal, and but he taught PE when I was in 4th and 5th grade. And he taught PE and coached the football team with the high school kids. I remember that he would bring out all the high school equipment and use it with the elementary school kids, which really got them excited. He taught us high jumping. I remember on one occasion, I was in jumping into this really great jumping pit, but I couldn't get over the bar. So finally, to get the line moving, he just came over and got me by the seat of the pants and threw me over the bar. He was a good man. So K-12, it was a redwood school, just like the houses were, for the most part, constructed of redwood, and it was a great place. Problem was that the school didn't get finished in time to open in September. It didn't open until October, about October 8th, I think, when the school actually opened. The principal of the school was also the superintendent of the new school district. His name was Petrie, a young man from Sparks. He had recently been a principal in Lund, Nevada, and I can imagine how many kids he had at Lund, Nevada. That was a small rural school. He came here to be the superintendent and the principal of a school that would have about 1,000 kids. The plan was to also have a school in the Carver Park neighborhood. Paul Revere Williams was an architect from LA who designed almost all of the Henderson infrastructure, houses and Carver Park School and the high school. So the school opened late. That had to create a lot of panic in Mr. Petrie's heart. In the meantime, there was a school down, they called it the Pittman School, and that school was just almost shoulder to shoulder with what they called Anderson's Camp. Anderson's Camp was where all of the workers who were building the plant and building the town, that's where they spent their nights. There was a cafeteria there, and pretty hot environment for the workers to work all day in a really hot environment and then spend their nights in a hot tent. I guess another benefit that having a town and a school affiliated with a defense plant was that the town was eligible for aid to impacted areas. There was what they called the Lantham Act out of Washington during those years, and provided quite a bit of funding for the small school districts. There were about 14 at the time in Clark County, 14 small school districts, and there was not very much taxable income in a lot of these districts, but what was to be the Henderson School District was pretty well funded by government funds due to these impacted areas. I mentioned Petrie had a hard time getting the school opened because the construction process dragged on too long. Another problem they had was the teachers didn't get their first paycheck, and many of these teachers had been working since the summer. If you know good school teachers, they don't wait till school starts to get down to school and start getting ready. And so the teachers at the town site school had probably been working as early as June. They didn't get their first paycheck until just before Christmas. This is the Depression era. These are folks who came here fleeing from hardship in the towns where they were raised or where they'd recently lived, and then had that terrible disappointment. I wish I could read more about how they fed their families. That's something that hopefully the whole neighborhood can help us with. When we posted some information about what we were going to do with this activity tonight on Facebook, and immediately the museum in Sparks, where Mr. Petrie was raised, shared all of the information that we'd put up, and then they had a letter that had appeared in the Reno Evening's Journal, all about Mr. Petrie, that as a youngster he'd had polio, and got better. A lot of kids didn't get better, but he survived it and was strong enough to play football. And we have a picture that we posted on Facebook, and the government liked to publicize what they were doing, and they had some nice promotions about Mr. Petrie. The really interesting thing about this lack of pay was that that group of teachers, there were no strikes or no screaming and hollering, no protests. They just simply went about their business. I'm sure the government helped. We had tons of cafeterias in the plant and in Anderson's camp, so I'll bet anything families got fed. But I've not read anything about how that all took place. That would be a nice piece to add to our history. So that was October of '42 that the school opened. Kids from the Pittman School, which would have been down maybe where the Joker's Wild is now, those kids could move up to what was to be Henderson. We all called it the town site, and so they were off and running with a little more than 1,000 kids. And then in about a year, they finished the Carver Park School, which was not redwood, it was cinder block. And there were about 300 units in that development. Just right on the verge of the desert. It was not very glamorous. The school itself in Carver Park had been a CCC camp facility. It was a dorm. So when they knew that they were going to build Carver Park and they would need a school there, they put it on a flatbed truck and moved it into the northern end of Carver Park. Really just a humble old school. The pictures I've seen of it in 1943 was that the exterior was tar paper. Do you all know what tar paper is? And if you live in an old Henderson house, the houses were roofed with tar paper. That was one step before they actually applied hot tar. My family came to the area in 1946, and I was ready for kindergarten in Las Vegas, and we couldn't find a house, but we're Catholics, and so we beat it down to Monsignor Carmody's house and church, and he helped us to get a place in Carver Park. By that time, they'd stuccoed the exterior of that building. A swamp cooler for when the weather was hot, and when it was cold, they had a kerosene stove right in the middle of the room. Now that sounds like the Lincoln era, doesn't it? I don't ever remember one of the kids complaining about a kerosene stove. I mean, how come we don't have electricity? I don't remember one kid complaining about the swamp coolers. The teachers, I'm sure the teachers weren't thrilled with it, but they didn't complain. They were a happy bunch, and they made us happy kids too. If you're new around here and you don't remember Carver Park, there was a lot of evidence even after they demolished it. They knocked down the walls and hauled away all the cinder block, but then left the basements or the foundations, and the foundations were there, and I guess until somebody had an idea about a building that they wanted to put there, and then they came in with a scar fire and dug out the old foundations. My first grade teacher, I went to kindergarten maybe for 3 or 4 weeks while we lived in Vegas before we got the apartment in Carver Park. When I got to Henderson, though, they told me, well, we don't have kindergarten yet. So, but I'll bet you could make it in first grade. So they just put me in first grade, and for weeks I thought I was the dumbest kid on earth, because everybody in the first grade in Henderson, they were so smart. They could just do everything, and it took me a while to get myself on track, but I did finally make it. My first grade teacher was Clark Carroll. Anybody here teach way back in the day? Clark Carroll was Glenn Carroll's mother, and who was a kid that I went to school with at the Townsite School and at St. Peter's, and then roomed with him up at UNR for a period of time. I can still remember all my first grade, or my Carver Park teachers. Effie Plunkett was the 4th grade teacher, Effie Plunkett. Being involved in history now, I've read a lot of the old Henderson Home News, and the Henderson Home News would always list who the teachers were going to be in each of the components of Henderson. And Effie Plunkett eventually moved up to the Townsite School. But before I left Carver Park, she told me, you ought to be a historian. You should teach history. Now, I can't imagine what I did I was 4th grade with her. I'm sure maybe she was just trying to make me feel good. But anyway, I thought it's kind of ironic that I've wound up doing a lot of history work. I'm not a historian, but I am excited about history. And that's why I volunteer with the Henderson Historical Society. And I've also been volunteering with a group called the Archive Committee, which is, the school district probably took 1 million pictures in its long history, but they used them for promotions and then just threw them in a box. So a group of us volunteered our services to them. So we've been trying to archive their photography and also all kinds of documents that they have. We produced a book. We wrote a book about the history of the history of education in Southern Nevada. I brought 3 or 4 of them with me. We have a ton of them. We haven't been selling them. They're good, and I'm just sure we could sell every one of them if we wanted to, but we've been mostly giving them away because we printed them with donation money. So if you're really excited about it, I'll give you one of those 3 or 4 that I brought with me, and then at some other occasion, let me know and I'll bring some more books, and eventually we'll get everybody stocked with a good history of the schools in Southern Nevada. Yeah, Carver Park was unique. It's the kind of school where on your way early in the morning to get down there, you might hear a 410 go off and a coyote shriek in pain. The custodian shot buzzards and shot coyotes. not when we were there, but frequently we were within earshot of his marksmanship. Yeah, my family moved up to Tungsten Street, and I don't know how we got into that house, because my dad was a Keno dealer at the Boulder Club down on Fremont Street. You used to have to be, the rule was that you had to, you had to work at the plant. But around 1944, the plant had produced such a great surplus of magnesium and the components for fire bombs and lightened metal for aircraft. And they had just a great supply of that, and so they just stopped making it and started laying off the workers. And a lot of the workers went back where they came from. But there were people who stayed in Henderson without a job because maybe for the first time in their lives they had a house that they could live in, and that's how my folks were. Then Henderson built some new homes along Basic Road and Victory Road, and down in the Church Street where Donnell and Miss Laporta used to live. So I was eligible, I guess, as a town site student to attend the K-12 school, and I was in Mrs. Haynes's class in 4th grade, and I was in Mrs. Larkin's class in 5th grade. Later on, I worked with Mrs. Larkin as a colleague. I worked at Bracken School where Gary Hafen, probably a relative of Andy. Is Gary Hafen, are you related to? He's a good man, good guy to work for. That was Bracken School, and Mrs. Larkin, when I went in, there she was, my 5th grade teacher, and now all of a sudden we're working together. That was a nice thing about Henderson and about Las Vegas too, that teachers all knew each other. Where's Don Biddle? Don and Eileen Biddle are teachers who just taught their whole young lives in Henderson schools. We have a good phone book that Don's parents gave him, and then he let the Henderson libraries copy that. So it's online. If you want to have a good time, get on to the Henderson libraries, their digital collection. And one of the things is that phone directory. When you look for somebody's phone number in the phone directory, it would tell you who the father was, who the mother was, where the father worked, and who the kids in the family were. So, I mean, nowadays, that would be an invasion of privacy to do that. And that's one of my favorite pieces to look for on the website. We have a number of other of those old directories. Look around your house. Anything you have that your kids are going to want to start throwing away as you age. I know my kids, they're just thinking about how they can straighten up that messy house of mine, because I have, the closets are all full of Henderson Historical Society memorabilia, things that nobody wants but me. They've begun to think I'm like a junk collector, I guess. Went to school at the town site school, where I had good experience with Robert Taylor teaching me how to be a high jumper. Essence McDaniel was teaching there at that time. He coached football. Lou Laporta, Val's dad, told me that he used to go down to the drugstore, Macbeth's drugstore, and have coffee in the morning with his, compatriots who were in business in Henderson. And it'd be early in the morning, and when you're practicing, especially in the early months, August and September, you had to start really early. But Lou said you could hear Estes yelling and screaming at the kids, the football players, and of course they were yelling and screaming too, trying to show their enthusiasm. He said that was memorable, and they, of course, then they all started teasing Estes McDaniel for what a great pair of lungs he had. In 1952, the Father Moran, I guess maybe in 51 or 50, he got a whole bunch of his parishioners and maybe parishioners from other churches too, because he had a great enticing way about him, and of course they got a lot of Catholic kids too to help, and they started building the St. Peter's school, and then he had somebody there building a what was it, the grotto, yeah, the grotto. I guess that was an awful lot of churches and private schools. They were all handmade by people, and they look kind of funny sometimes because as people wore out and left the project, somebody else had to take over, and things didn't quite fit together like you would expect. But so I attended the St. Peter's School for a few years until I was in high school. So all during the 50s, the town was growing. Had a great project to build a recreation center, and the library, the Henderson Library, and the museum that where Mark presided for many years. They have a ton of really good pictures of all the people that helped us. Entertainers from the Strip came out here and put on shows, and that recreation, that's really a part of education in Henderson. It was the first swimming pool we had. If you wanted to go swimming in those days, you had to drive out to Lake Mead, and just worry about what was down just below the water, a big carp or something that would come and bite you on the foot. Long about 54, 55, the schools in Clark County, the 14 small school districts, just were about to give up the ghost. They were in terrible financial shape. They couldn't make payment on their salaries and couldn't afford to pay their debts. And Las Vegas, which was, like Mark said, had elements of several school districts right in the city of Las Vegas, were having the same struggle. Schools on double sessions, and just the fear of not being able to pay your debts was hard. So Argyle Gray, who was the superintendent of the Las Vegas schools, first he got the grand jury. This really startled me when I read this. Of course, I didn't have any idea about it when it was happening, but when I got involved in this project, I began to find out interesting things. He got the district attorney and the grand jury to investigate the whole thing. Why are we so strapped that we can't pay our debts? And then he wrote a letter to Governor Sawyer, and Sawyer got with the legislature, and they realized they had to do something about it. A minimum property tax up to that point in time, and very little in the way of sales tax. And so the legislature agreed to help, and they hired Peabody College, which is an education school in Tennessee, which is now merged with Vanderbilt. But in those days, they were a separate school. And they did a comprehensive study of how the state of Nevada could get its house in order. And And then they partnered with Stanford's Research Associates group, a man named Conant, who was a great educator. And they produced a plan that would raise enough money that the schools could get the kids off of double sessions, and so that they could repair schools that just were completely in bad shape. And in 1956, they began to enact some of these suggestions. One was that they would consolidate all of the 300 small school districts that were in the state of Nevada, consolidate them into 17 county school districts, and they would enact sales tax, and where they could expand on property tax, and so at that point in time, I guess Henderson was, of all the school districts, probably Henderson was the best off financially, because they had they had aid from the government, aid to impacted areas, and the BMI plants. The war was over, of course, but during the Korean War, they had needed materials from the plant, so that they still qualified as the plant, brought families and kids here to work, and so the government provided that extra money. Do you remember Joe Phillips? Shirley Phillips. Shirley's been a loyal supporter of the Historical Society, but maybe she's not here tonight. But Joe Phillips he taught at the basic elementary school, and he was a principal in Las Vegas for many years. And he and I were principals together, and he told me, he said, I don't think the Henderson people, they don't want to be consolidated because they're doing really good the way they are. I thought that was an interesting story. So that's the story about the consolidation, and I think that Vegas and Henderson, or Vegas especially, would have really been in bad shape if they hadn't done that. And I think a lot of small districts around the country, around the state of Nevada, benefited from that. I'm gonna, there are incidental things. We had basic high school, but then along in the Basic moved, maybe another part of the story, Basic moved from the town site area, and they built a new Basic high school in 1954, which is up where the Burkholder Middle School is, and then in around 1971, they built another new school that became Basic High School, and they placed up on Palo Verde. We posted a bunch of good pictures on Facebook, and if you want to see what the Basic High School looked in all of its iterations, you can do that. My focus really is on the older schools, and so that our other guests can have a chance to say a few words, because we're running out of time, I can see vastly. Let me turn the mic over to Mary Beth Scow. In the very tail end of my career with the school district, Mary Beth and I, we were colleagues. Mary Beth was the school board of trustees, and I was the principal up in Lummis. So take it, Mary Beth.
Thank you. Are we on? Okay. Well, thank you. That was so interesting to go back. It's fun to hear all those experiences. I wasn't raised here, so I always really enjoy hearing people's experiences and how Henderson in particular grew. I'm going to cover the time period while I was on the school board for education a little before and a little after. So like from the 90s through till the recession hit in 2008. And probably the main themes from that period were growth, growth, and growth. We just exploded. Our population exploded in the whole Clark County Valley. And so it was quite an experience to see how growth was handled from the perspective of a school trustee. And by the way, I just think Henderson is good people. We have just wonderful, great people that live in Henderson. And I always just felt so good about my children being in schools with wonderful educators. And I think overall, the Clark County School District gets criticized a lot, but there are amazing principals, teachers, and support staff in the schools that work so hard. Like you said, they start working in June. Just very dedicated, wonderful people in the schools. And those of you that had children in school in the 80s and the 90s probably had kids go on double sessions or change schools 2 or 3 times without moving. And that was kind of the commonplace thing. I served with 3 superintendents in the Clark County School District. Brian Cram, who served from 1989 to 2000. He gave us notice in 98 and said, I'm going to retire in 2 years. So that'll give you 2 years to choose a new superintendent. And it took the whole 2 years. It was a grueling experience. But Dr. Cram was really remarkable in handling the growth, because I know when my husband and I first moved here in 1977, I read an article in the paper that said that the Chamber of Commerce was fighting the school district over a bond issue that was coming up, and the business community was not supportive at all in building new schools. And Dr. Cram went out into the community and made a case for why we needed new schools. 5,000 people a week were moving into Las Vegas in the late 1990s, and all the way through, it was more than that by the time the recession hit. So we made the case for the fact that we needed new schools, but we also needed to modernize the older schools. So that was really I think that was his main, what he did for the Clark County School District was get the growth under control. When he retired, we went through a search process, which was quite highly politicized and not always very positive. Present company included. If you ever want to talk about that, you can come ask me, but I'm not going to talk about it here. But we hired Carlos Garcia. He served for 5 years, kind of a change agent, because we'd been in such a growth mode. He tried to increase the achievement level, close the achievement gap, had all the kids take the PSAT exam, had reading specialists in each elementary school with the goal of having every child reading by 3rd grade. He retired, and we hired Walt Rolfus, who was the chief financial officer. He was my favorite superintendent. He was very concerned about students, and everything he did was what's best for the students. He always asked that question. He tried school choice in the Northwest to allow kids to go to choose their high school where there was space available, pilot project. He built 4 besides VOTEC, which is now the Southeast Career and Technical Academy. So there's now 5. I think they actually built another one, Career and Technical Academies, where kids can go and have an in-depth program to prepare them for careers, but most of them go on to college, and they have a 97% retention rate. They're just amazing programs. Got 5 around the county. He we had a dropout problem. He's got retired administrators and teachers, and they went out door to door and asked kids, why did you drop out? And everybody always would say, well, they're dropping out because they can get better jobs by going and parking cars. That was always what everybody said. But you know what? They found out it wasn't because of that at all. Most of the kids dropping out were credit deficient, were having problems in school, and so he got resources and tried to work on getting kids up on their credits, and it was just an amazing thing. It's amazing what you can do when you really know what the problem is to address it. So I mentioned the growth. During the time I was a trustee, I think there were 210,000 students when I was elected in 1996. I started my term in 1997. By the time I finished, we had almost 300,000 kids. So we were building 12 to 16 schools every year. So you can imagine the number of schools that had to be rezoned during that time. But I looked at Henderson. In that period of time, we went from 3 high schools. That's including Silverado High School, which isn't exactly in Henderson, but it took in Henderson students. We went from 3 to 7 high schools. And 2 of those high schools weren't actually in Henderson, Liberty and Del Sol, but they took in Henderson students. We had 4 middle schools. We went to 9 middle schools and 14 elementary schools to 26 elementary schools. And since 2008, we've built 5 elementary schools well, District A is what I'm talking about, but it's all of Henderson. Dr. Cram instituted some bond initiatives. So we had, I think, 4 elections to approve bonds during the time I was on the school board. And the last one was a 10-year program, went through 2008. But you can imagine the 88 schools were promised, 101 were actually built, and 200 modernization programs and 13 replacement schools. So there was a lot managed well with that bond program. I could talk a long time about funding. If you have any questions about funding, maybe we can ask during the question and answer period. But one thing that has happened, there was a Nevada plan that was initiated in 1967 after school districts were organized by counties. The pot of money of education revenue goes into the legislature. The legislature has a funding formula for a basic per pupil funding for each school, and then that is divvied out to each district with a formula based on the wealth of the county, the number of students they have, and there's another factor I just forgot. Anyway, there was another change made in 2019 to add a weighted formula so that students that require extra funding, like second language students, gifted and talented students, at-risk students, and they're still working on the complete definition of that, have a weighted formula. So money follows that student. So wherever that student's going to school, the extra money goes to them. If they change schools, it goes with them. So it's a good thing to have that weighted formula, and it helps kids. Good things happened in those years. We did a lot for community input into education. We did a community educational advisory board for Boulder City, which is still operating. We started and actually did a lot of work to set up a community educational advisory board in Henderson. The first meeting was supposed to be on September 11th, 2001. And as you can imagine, we didn't have that meeting, and then we never did have a meeting for it after all that work. But the city of Henderson has done an amazing job, and Dan's going to talk a little bit more about that. And I look at Janet Dobry, and I think of some amazing things that were done in Henderson schools. Janet initiated the School of the Mines at McCaw Elementary, a model for schools around the valley. has a model of a mine, a visitor center in partnership with mining companies and other partners. And it's a fabulous thing that kids from all over the county get to go see on field trips. So accolades to Janet, I think we should. Lots of people that worked on it, but you were the ignition on that. Several other Henderson schools, and they called it the museum. I couldn't think, and I couldn't find it anywhere. They call it something like the museum schools in Henderson. But we also had, what? Cholla? Okay. The consortium. Because we had Estes McDaniel had a marine biology lab. Vanderburg Elementary School put in a rainforest biosphere. Lamping Elementary School has a science and technology lab. They have a simulator of a space shuttle, like a 3/4 size. It's the most amazing thing. For a while, it was the only one like it west of the Mississippi. Did I get them all? Lamping. But amazing things for all students in Henderson and beyond that could go on field trips. Recently, we've had a lot of attention on deconsolidation or breaking up the school district. Dan started an initiative that would allow cities, incorporated cities or counties to opt out. I looked back at other efforts to do that, and in the 70s, there was a try at it. Jeff Burr, who was the trustee before I took office, went to the legislature in 1997 and got a study passed. They spent $250,000 on it and a year long, and basically said, we can't figure out how you can split it up. And there's all sorts of challenges for that, like how do you divide up the bond indebtedness? How do you divide up schools and zone students and teacher contracts? They pointed it out. We all knew that those were problems. Then there was in the 2017 legislature, a reorganization plan brought up. Mayor Hafen and I served on the technical committee for that, and basically, pretty much the legislators had decided what they wanted to do. And we were just a committee to hear what they wanted to do. But instead of breaking up the school district, they decided to do a reorganization that would give greater autonomy to the schools. And I think the results of that have been less than stellar. Kind of the schools had special committees made up of with the principal, community partners, parents, and it's had mixed success. So it's been quite an amazing couple of decades that we've had, 3 decades, I guess. You know, you're starting to get old when people you worked with have schools named after them. But my children had a great experience. I have 25 of my grandchildren who have gone through, are in, or will be in mostly Henderson schools. So I want our schools to be strong for our future. Education's so important. And it's just been wonderful to be here tonight. I've truly enjoyed it. I think I need to get involved in this. I love history too. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Beth. It's good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. It's gotten me thinking a lot about my schooling. Just so you know where I'm coming from, kind of put it in context, I'm a 4th generation Nevadan, Southern Nevadan. The Stewarts started moving down from Alamo. Some of you may know where Alamo is. Most of you probably don't. About 100 miles north of here in the middle of nowhere. And we moved here in the early 50s, about the time I was born. So I'm a CCSD product. Then my wife and I, after college, came and made the trek across the valley. I grew up on the northwest part of the valley, and we loved Green Valley and Henderson, and so we moved here in '79, and at the same time, Mary Beth, and we been,
77. I thought you came before we did.
oh, maybe I ought to change it to 75, so no, I'm just, but our kids grew up together, went to school together, and we've been lifelong friends, and now, like Mary Beth, so I'm a product, my kids are a product of CCSD, and now my grandkids are. Nothing against CCSD, I agree with Mary Beth, the teachers, the administrators, for the most part, are fabulous. But where I'm coming from is when I went to school, in high school, in the late 60s, early 70s, CCSD was ranked one of the top 5 school districts in the country. So we've gone a long ways downhill. I'm just going to be blunt about it. And I got that, I'd heard that, but many of you might know Hannah Brown. In fact, we got an elementary school named after Hannah here in Henderson. I went to lunch with her when we started this whole initiative thing to opt out of the consolidated into 17 school districts per county, and sat down with her to see if that'd be something she'd like to be involved in, and she absolutely said yes. And she says, when I went to school, she graduated from Las Vegas High and then probably the late 50s, early 60s, somewhere in there. She says, we were the #1 school district in the country. She goes, I go away for a long time. She was very successful in the airline business. She moved back she told me 28 years ago. When she moved back, we were 50th. Or 49th. She goes, what's happened to my Clark County School District where I was raised and got my education, and now we're last? And she says, that was 28 years ago and we're still last. So something's not quite right. And so she was all on board. So jumping in to Henderson, obviously we were part of these deconsolidation efforts over the 2 or 3 decades. Jeff Burr is a very close friend of ours, and never really got anywhere because of so many different challenges and problems that Mary Beth mentioned. But I've always been very interested in that. My kids were very Vanderbilt and Estes, grandkids as well. So we've been very interested in, because education is a big deal in our family. I didn't realize that until it just dawned on me one day that from my dad. He just demanded education, and it's permeated throughout our family, and it has made a big difference. So we thought we need to do something, and so we've always been involved. And then we came up with this idea probably about 18 months ago of maybe trying to make it as simple as possible that an entity, a city, maybe a town, whatever, however that got defined as a municipality, could opt out of its county school district, because there's 17, but mainly it was for Clark County, right? And so I said, well, if we're going to do this, we really need to get some people that know about education, which I know pretty much nothing about the business of education, as these two do. So Marilyn Kirkpatrick and Mary Beth were 2 of the first that jumped on board and said, we've got to do something. And that gave me the confidence, I guess, that, hey, look, some people that know what they're really talking about think this can be done. So we jumped in and started raising money. It's a very expensive effort. It's a very difficult effort to get an initiative, I guess, qualified, and rightfully so. I mean, I like to scream and yell that it's way too hard because we wanted our initiative to, to be qualified. But you think about it, it needs to be hard, or else the legislature would have 1,000 initiatives every 2 years to look at. It's very difficult, and it's meant to be. We had to get, hire a signature gathering firm. We thought they were pretty credible. We paid them a lot of money, and they came up way short. We got over 234,000 raw signatures. We needed 141,000 validated, and they didn't meet the mark. So it was devastating to us about a month ago when we found this out. But I guess the silver lining of that was that there is a huge narrative now. It's a real discussion at the legislature as we're preparing to go up there. I'm hoping most of you have probably heard about it, but there's real momentum. We wished we had the initiative because, as you know, the legislature is tough to get to do anything. But if we had that hammer, they'd have to have done something or it'd end up on the ballot in 2024. So we don't have that leverage or hammer, but there is a lot of momentum, I think. We're going to be up there fighting for it, although we don't have the leverage. We're still going to be trying to do something because, you know, I think probably the best, and I could get off my soapbox, but I think we all know the definition of insanity, and that is doing something over and over and over again and then expecting a different outcome. Well, you couldn't get a better example of that than what we're doing now with our kids, and it's just tragic for our children because they're the generation, and we're failing them as they fail in school, and it's going to have a major impact on everything. And if you want to just put the green glasses on as a businessman, what are we going to do economically when we don't have any trained, people to fill the job? So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but we aren't giving up. And in fact, we'll see where the legislature takes it. But if we're so inclined, we're going to file again in, well, actually a year from right now. We'll see where it goes in the legislative session. But just a couple other things, and I'll be quiet. When I first became a city councilman, I heard about the consolidation, and I had this bright idea. I said, well, there had to be some kind of contract, right? When they consolidated these 300 school districts into 17, there had to be some contract that held the county school district to some kind of performance, right? That's a typical contract. Performance. So I had the city attorney look at it and say, hey, can you go through when they consolidated all this and find something that says you have to meet this Clark County School District or we can back out, right? As a Henderson School District or the Railroad Pass School. That wasn't there. That was the thought I had. But anyway, it didn't work. And so we've been trying many different ideas. But just as a point, and then I'll be quiet, I think you all remember, well, we all do, the marijuana bill that was passed that was supposed to go directly to the money to the students. Did that happen? No. But the cities, the entities, get a portion of that through their licensing fees and whatnot. And so Councilman Shaw, I should say it was me with the great idea, but he's not here, so I could take credit. But Dan had the great idea of saying, well, let's take 30% of what the city makes off of the marijuana, because the state isn't getting it to the schools. So we did that, and we were the first ones to set up a CEAB, Citizens Education Advisory Board. Some others have followed, but so I had Jim McIntosh, who was just as recently became assistant city manager, was our CFO, still a CFO, and he came from the CCSD many years. He was a great guy. I asked him to give me the numbers over when we enacted it was in 2018, and over the 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, and we're still not done with 23 yet. The city has put into CEAB and let them distribute to the schools over $3 million from that. So we're doing everything we can, and I think as a city, and I'm not saying as city council, but as a city, as residents, we understand that, as Mary Beth said, the critical nature of getting our kids educated correctly. We owe it to them. So we're not going to give up the fight. We're going to keep trying. And I think maybe that's the future. Is that what we're past, kind of present, future? So anyway, thank you.
Okay, I'm being told that we have gone long. Can't imagine how that could have happened with our very quiet guests here that had nothing to say, obviously. Alextra Osborne, I hope you will come next time. We don't have time tonight. I'm sorry to say we don't have time for questions tonight. I know we have a lot of questions out there. I know you guys would like to take those questions. We don't have time. We have to be out of here by 8. What time is it? 7:55. That gives us enough time to walk out. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to the panel. Here's the one guy who's going to take the last few minutes.
The final word. Thank you, panelists, for being here. What an interesting program. Please give them another loud round of applause. And the thought occurred to me, if you don't mind just taking 30 seconds. I know we have plenty of educators here in the audience. Please stand up so we can recognize you. Please stand up. Anybody, I see the Biddles back there, stand up. Janet, where's Janet Bremer? You bet. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. We'll get the word out on our next Henderson Speaks because it will be about the El Dorado Pass Casino, and that's where we'll be meeting. Thanks again for coming out. Railroad Pass, right.